There are NBA superstars who fade slowly. And then there are the ones who seem to fall off a cliff. One year they look untouchable. A few seasons later, they are fighting for minutes, bouncing between teams, or disappearing from the league entirely. Sometimes it is the body breaking down. Sometimes the league changes and leaves them behind. Sometimes confidence goes first and everything else follows. But in every case, the drop feels shocking because of how high they once stood. These are some of the biggest downfalls in NBA history. The stars who looked built to last until suddenly they weren't. Russell Westbrook once felt unstoppable. In Oklahoma City, he was pure force, explosive, reckless, and impossible to slow down in the open floor. He piled up 9 All-Star appearances, over 200 triple-doubles, and won MVP in 2017 after one of the most relentless individual seasons the league had ever seen. At his peak, Westbrook did not just control games. He overwhelmed them. But the decline became obvious once the stability around him disappeared. After the Thunder traded him in 2019, he moved through Houston, Washington, Los Angeles, and beyond, with each stop feeling less natural than the last. The system was no longer built around his strengths, and modern spacing-heavy basketball exposed the weaknesses in his shooting more than ever. By the time he reached the later stage of his career, the burst was no longer as terrifying. The mid-range game had faded, and defenses were far more comfortable sagging off him. He still had flashes, but flashes were not enough. For a player who once looked like the engine of an entire era, ending up as a veteran searching for his next fit made the drop feel brutally steep. Derrick Rose had one of the fastest rises the NBA had ever seen. He was the #1 pick in 2008, won Rookie of the Year, and by 2011 had become the youngest MVP in league history. That season, he averaged 25 points and nearly 8 assists while leading Chicago to 62 wins. He was explosive, fearless, and looked like the future of the league. Then came the injury that changed everything. In the 2012 playoffs, Rose tore his ACL, and the momentum of his career never truly came back. He missed the next season, returned, then tore the meniscus in the other knee. After that, more surgeries followed along with ankle issues, lingering pain, and the constant feeling that his body could no longer support the game that made him special. Rose still gave fans rare reminders of who he used to be, especially in moments like his unforgettable 50-point game in Minnesota. But those flashes only made the fall feel sadder. He was once supposed to be the face of the Bulls for a generation. Instead, his career became one of the clearest examples of how fast injuries can take away a superstar's future. Dwight Howard was the most dominant center in basketball. He was an 8-time All-Star, a 3-time Defensive Player of the Year, and the anchor of an Orlando team that reached the finals. At his best, he controlled the paint with strength, timing, rebounding, and shot blocking that made him feel physically overwhelming. The turning point came after his back surgery in 2012. That herniated disc did more than sideline him. It took away the explosive power that defined his game. And for a player whose dominance depended so much on verticality and physical force, that loss changed everything. Howard also struggled to evolve with the league. He never developed the kind of outside shot or polished post game that could carry him once his athletic edge started slipping. As the NBA leaned harder into spacing and shooting, his fit became shakier. He kept moving from team to team, Lakers, Rockets, Hornets, Hawks, Wizards, with each stop feeling smaller than the one before. He eventually won a title with the Lakers in 2020, but by then he was a role player, not a franchise pillar. That is what made his downfall so striking. A player who once looked like the most feared big man in the league became in the end just another veteran trying to hang on. Ben Simmons entered the league looking like a basketball experiment that should not have worked. Except it did. Nearly 7 feet tall, elite court vision, defensive versatility, and the ability to handle the ball like a guard, he looked like the prototype for the future. He won Rookie of the Year, made multiple All-Star teams, and for a while seemed like the kind of player who could control a game without even needing to score. Then the cracks started spreading. Injuries took away time and rhythm, especially the back problems that kept returning and slowly drained his mobility. But the physical issues were only part of it. The mental side of his decline played out just as publicly. His poor free throw shooting became a constant storyline. His refusal to shoot from outside became a bigger and bigger problem. And then came that playoff meltdown, the passed-up layup that turned into a symbol of everything people thought was wrong. After that, the confidence looked shattered. He clashed with his team, sat out, got traded, and never came close to recovering the version of himself people once imagined. A player who once looked like a franchise weapon became a permanent question mark. And that kind of fall feels even harsher when the talent was so obvious from the beginning. Blake Griffin used to feel like pure impact. He entered the league as the #1 pick, won Rookie of the Year, and quickly became one of the most explosive stars in basketball. During the Lob City years, he was everywhere, dunking through defenders, running the floor, and turning almost every big game into a highlight package. He was not just productive, he was electric. But Griffin's body had been warning everyone for years. The knees kept wearing down, and the injuries slowly chipped away at the thing that made him terrifying. As the bounce started fading, he tried to adapt. In Detroit, he expanded his game, handled the ball more, passed more, and stretched the floor better than people expected. For a while, it worked. Still, there was no real replacement for the athletic force he used to play with. Once that lift disappeared, the pressure he put on defenses changed completely. By the end, he was playing limited minutes, scoring very little, and barely looked like the same player who once lived above the rim. Griffin did not vanish overnight, but the contrast between his peak and his finish made his downfall impossible to miss. At his best, DeMarcus Cousins looked like the most complete offensive center in the league. He had size, power, touch passing ability, and a mean streak that made him impossible to ignore. In Sacramento, and later in New Orleans, he was putting up massive numbers, over 25 points, double-digit rebounds, and the kind of offensive versatility that few big men could match. He looked like a star built to dominate for years. Then everything collapsed in a brutal sequence. In 2018, Cousins tore his Achilles while playing some of the best basketball of his career. That injury alone can change everything for a big man. But before he could truly come back, he tore his quad, then his ACL. 3 major leg injuries in such a short time effectively destroyed the physical base of his game. After that, he was no longer the same force. The dominance disappeared. The mobility was gone. The easy power finishes were harder, and the explosive edge that once separated him from other centers never really returned. Cousins did not have a slow decline. He had a career that got hit again and again until the version everyone feared was simply gone. Yao Ming was more than a star. He was a global event. As the #1 pick in 2002, he became the face of a new era for the NBA, bringing international attention to the league while anchoring the Houston Rockets with size, touch, and consistency. At his peak, he looked like one of the next great centers, a player with real skill, real presence, and a career that should have lasted much longer than it did. But his body could not hold up. The problems started with his feet and never really stopped. Toe issues, foot fractures, ankle trouble, one injury after another kept interrupting his prime. From the middle of the 2000s through the start of the next decade, he missed huge chunks of time, and every comeback felt more fragile than the last. What makes Yao's downfall so cruel is how early it ended. By his final season, he played only a handful of games. In 2011, he retired at just 30 years old. That is not a normal decline. That is a career cutoff before it was supposed to be finished. He did not just leave behind great numbers. He left behind the feeling that the league never got to see how far he really could have gone. John Wall once looked like the perfect modern point guard. He was the #1 pick in 2010, became a 5-time All-Star, made All-NBA, and gave Washington an identity built on speed, pressure, and playmaking. At his best, he could turn a defensive rebound into a fast break in seconds, collapse the defense, and control the tempo of the game almost entirely with his burst. Then the injuries took over. First it was the knees, then the heel, and then the Achilles. The worst part was how quickly it all stacked up. In 2018, Wall had heel surgery, dealt with a serious infection, and then tore his Achilles during rehab. That single stretch completely changed the direction of his career. He missed massive amounts of time and never truly got back to the same level. The speed that once made him special was no longer there. He still had flashes in Houston, but they felt like reminders, not evidence of a comeback. By the time he reached the Clippers, he was no longer a franchise guard. He was just another veteran trying to hold on to a shrinking role. For a player once built around explosion, losing that one trait changed everything. Isaiah Thomas was supposed to be one of the league's great underdog stories. The last pick in the draft, overlooked from the start, he fought his way into stardom and reached an incredible peak in Boston. During the 2016-17 season, he averaged nearly 29 points per game, finished 5th in MVP voting, and looked like one of the most dangerous scorers in the league, despite standing well under 6 feet tall. Then came the hip injury and everything changed. He played through it during the playoffs, but the damage was already serious. Torn cartilage, chronic pain, and structural problems took away the burst that made him so difficult to guard. Once Boston traded him, he entered a terrible situation in Cleveland where he was not fully healthy and was expected to be something he could no longer be. From there, the decline came fast. The scoring dropped. The minutes got shorter. The teams kept changing. Lakers, Nuggets, Wizards, short stints and fading opportunities. For a player whose rise had been so unlikely and so inspiring, the fall felt especially harsh. He had reached the edge of superstardom only to watch one injury pull almost all of it away. Grant Hill entered the NBA looking like the full package. Size, skill, passing, scoring, intelligence, leadership, he had everything. In Detroit, he quickly became one of the best all-around players in basketball, putting up over 20 points, 6 rebounds, and 5 assists a game while looking like a future MVP. For a moment, it felt like the league's next great superstar had already arrived. Then the ankle injuries started, and they never really stopped. What first seemed manageable became something much worse after his move to Orlando. Surgery followed surgery, and the damage kept piling up. At one point, complications from a procedure became so severe that his health was in real danger, not just his career. Hill did come back and still had productive years later on, which is part of what makes his story so strange. He was not completely erased, but the version of him that looked destined for all-time greatness was gone. That is why his downfall hits differently. It was not about a player becoming bad. It was about a player who should have been much bigger than his final resume ever had the chance to become. Gilbert Arenas had one of the most explosive scoring peaks of his era. A second-round pick who turned himself into a star, he became a nightmare for defenses with deep-range swagger and the willingness to take any big shot. In his prime, he was putting up nearly 30 a game and looked like one of the most dangerous offensive guards in the league. The decline started with injuries. A knee injury in 2007 led to surgeries and limited him badly. He never fully got his old rhythm back after that. But in Arenas' case, the physical decline was only part of the story. The locker room gun incident in 2009 changed everything else. The suspension damaged his reputation, and after that, teams no longer viewed him the same way. That combination was devastating. The scoring dropped, the trust disappeared, and the version of Arenas who once felt fearless never fully returned. He still bounced around the league and even went overseas. But the drop was obvious. He went from being one of the NBA's most electric scorers to a cautionary tale about how quickly talent injury and off-court mistakes can collide. Gordon Hayward was never the loudest star in the league, but at his peak, he was one of the most complete wings in basketball. In Utah, he developed into an all-star by doing everything well. He could score a handle-the-ball pass, defend multiple positions, and shoot close to 40% from three. By 2017, he looked like the kind of player a contender could build around. Then 5 minutes into his Boston debut, everything changed. Hayward fractured his tibia and dislocated his ankle in one of the most shocking opening night injuries the league had seen in years. He missed the entire season, and even when he returned, it was clear he was fighting to recover more than just timing. He was trying to recover the version of himself that existed before that moment. Hayward still had useful stretches after that, especially in Charlotte, where he put together some strong scoring seasons. But the old burst never fully came back, and the injuries kept stacking up. Ankle problems, hand injuries, soft tissue issues, one setback after another kept interrupting whatever rhythm he built. By the later stage of his career, he was no longer viewed as a cornerstone. He was a talented veteran whose body would not let him stay in one place long enough to matter the same way. That is what made his downfall so frustrating. Hayward did not collapse because he forgot how to play. He collapsed because the body that once supported a complete, balanced, high-level game never truly returned after that one terrible moment. What makes NBA downfalls so hard to watch is not just the drop itself. It is the gap between what these players were and what they were supposed to become. Some were wrecked by injuries. Some were exposed by change. Some lost the one thing their whole game depended on. But all of them remind you of the same truth. In the NBA, greatness can feel permanent right up until the moment it disappears.